My brothers and sisters, there are moments in leadership that do not allow you to sleep. Moments when the weight of responsibility presses so heavily on your chest that silence itself feels dangerous. Tonight I speak to you not as a politician, not as a man seeking praise or sympathy, but as a soldier who has seen betrayal up close and understands how fragile a revolution truly is. When you stand up for your people, when you challenge systems that have kept Africa weak for generations, you very quickly learn one painful truth. You discover who your real friends are. And today, I must speak openly about something that proves African unity is no longer just a slogan, but a living, breathing reality. In our darkest hour, when forces were moving quietly in the shadows, when betrayal was being planned with precision and patience, our brothers in Uganda stepped forward. Yes, Ugandan military intelligence. They did not hesitate. They did not calculate political cost. They did not ask what they would gain. They shared critical intelligence, exact locations, precise movements, verified names. Information that exposed where traitors were hiding and how they planned to strike against our beloved Burkina Faso. This was not foreign interference. This was Pan-African solidarity in action. African intelligence protecting African sovereignty. Before we go deeper, you must understand the gravity of what happened. On January 3rd, there was an attempt not just to remove me from power, but to kill me. An assassination. This was not rumor. This was not speculation. This was confirmed intelligence. And the man behind it was someone you already know. A man who once sat in this very chair. Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. The same man entrusted with protecting Burkina Faso. The same man who failed his people. The same man who chose ambition over duty. Without Uganda's intelligence cooperation, connecting these dots would have been far more difficult. Their information exposed communication lines, movement patterns, and coordination across borders. This was not a random coup attempt. It was organized. It was financed. It was international. And it confirmed what many suspected for years, that certain forces would rather burn Burkina Faso than allow it to stand independent. Let me remind you of history. In October 2022, I removed Damiba from power, not for personal ambition, not for revenge, but because he was failing to protect civilians, failing to confront terrorism, failing to lead. Since then, he has lived comfortably in Togo, while our soldiers died, while mothers buried their children, while villages burned, and all that time he was plotting. Then something strange happened. After an extradition order was issued, there were 5 days of silence. No statement from Lomé, no statement from Ouagadougou. 5 days. In politics, silence is never accidental. According to sources close to Damiba, on January 16th, soldiers arrived at his villa in Adidogomé, Lomé, and escorted him directly to the Court of Appeal. The judge reviewed our request and approved his expulsion. But questions remain, very serious questions. After the judge approved the expulsion order, Damiba was reportedly allowed to return briefly to collect personal belongings. And this is where the story becomes deeply disturbing. He was living inside what sources described as a compound of 6 villas. 6, not one modest residence, not a small apartment, a fortified compound, heavily guarded, secured, monitored. While ordinary Burkinabe families struggled to survive, this man lived behind walls, gates, and armed protection. This raises a fundamental question. Who was protecting him? And more importantly, why? Here is the contradiction that cannot be ignored. If Damiba was truly under restrictions, if he was being monitored, if he could not move freely, then how did he coordinate an assassination attempt across multiple countries? How did he communicate with intermediaries? How did money move? How did logistics get arranged? How did he collaborate with armed extremist networks linked to Al-Qaeda, the very groups killing our civilians daily? Either he was not truly restricted, authorities failed completely, or someone chose to look the other way. I'm not making accusations, but history teaches us one thing. Silence and inconsistency often hide uncomfortable truths. What we know for certain is this. On Saturday, January 17th, Damiba was escorted to the airport. Soldiers accompanied him. No public announcement, no press briefing. And then he boarded a flight. Where did it go? That question remains unanswered officially. And until it is answered, speculation will continue. But one thing is clear, Damiba is no longer in Togo. This extradition is significant, not just legally, but politically. For over 2 years, Togo was a complication in Burkina Faso's security calculations. By acting now, Togo has removed a major obstacle. It signals a shift. It suggests recognition that harboring destabilizing figures comes at a cost. This decision may quietly reshape regional security dynamics. Now let us return to the January 3rd assassination attempt. This was not a reckless action. It was carefully designed, strategically funded, internationally coordinated. Multiple countries were involved. And Uganda knew. They tracked movements, they traced communications, they identified financial routes. This level of intelligence does not come from coincidence. It comes from cooperation, professionalism, and commitment to African sovereignty. Every serious conspiracy leaves a trail. Not just messages, not just meetings, but money. The January 3rd plot required logistics, movement across borders, payments to intermediaries, and silence from many people. According to intelligence assessments, a key part of the funding trail leads to Ivory Coast. Someone traveled there. Someone collected money. The amount was not small. Approximately $125,000. This was not pocket change. This was not an emotional donation. This was investment. Money like this does not appear without purpose. So the question becomes unavoidable. Who has the motive, the resources, and the historical pattern to support such an operation? There is a former president of Burkina Faso living comfortably in Ivory Coast today, a man whose name is inseparable from one of Africa's darkest moments, Blaise Compaoré, the man who came to power after the assassination of Thomas Sankara in 1987, a man whose political survival was built on betrayal. I'm not stating proof, I'm not making a formal accusation, but history forces us to ask questions. Revolutions do not die quietly. They are attacked by those who fear accountability. Thomas Sankara challenged exploitation. He challenged corruption. He challenged foreign domination. And he paid with his life. So when a new generation attempts to revive that spirit, it is not unreasonable to assume the same forces may return. The question is not whether history repeats itself. The question is whether we allow it to. This is where diplomacy becomes difficult. Unlike Togo, Ivory Coast has not shown clear willingness to cooperate, and that creates a blind spot. We know the actor in Togo. We know the intermediary in Ghana. But the source of funding, the organizer behind the organizer, remains hidden. Without cooperation from Ivory Coast, this network cannot be fully dismantled, and that is dangerous. Then there is Ghana, a man identified as King David, the middleman, the communicator, the link between Damiba and the wider network. He operated from Ghana. Now let me be very clear here. Ghana is not an enemy of progress. President Nana Akufo-Addo has maintained dialogue with the Alliance of Sahel states. If an extradition request is made, there is reason to believe Ghana will cooperate. This is not hostility. This is accountability. Let us be honest with ourselves. In 2022, Burkina Faso experienced 2 coups in 1 year. 2. That alone tells you something important. At that time, a coup was not difficult to organize. Institutions were weak. Intelligence networks were fragmented. Security coordination was poor. Ambition could move faster than accountability. And the people paid the price. Since then, how many attempts have there been to remove me? Some say more than 20. Officially 7 have been confirmed. But I know the truth. There have been more. Why have they all failed? Why do the same tactics that once worked so easily now collapse before execution? The answer is simple, but uncomfortable for my enemies. I'm not a career politician. I'm a combat soldier. I understand terrain. I understand timing. I understand intelligence. From the very first day, I treated power not as privilege but as responsibility. And that meant investing where it mattered most: intelligence. We rebuilt Burkina Faso's intelligence services. Not cosmetically, not symbolically, structurally. We trained officers properly. We created internal accountability. We built regional networks. We invested in technology. Most importantly, we removed political interference from intelligence work. Information began to flow again, patterns became visible, threats were detected early. This is how the January 3rd plot was discovered before execution. But intelligence alone is not enough. You must be able to act. We invested heavily in advanced drone capabilities. We established a drone base that is now among the most sophisticated in the region. The plotters knew something crucial. Without neutralizing that base, a coup would fail. That base does not just stop coups. It hunts insurgents. It protects villages. It saves lives. Planning a coup in Burkina Faso today is not impossible, but it is extremely difficult, and that reality changes everything. When you study every attempt to destabilize Burkina Faso since October 2022, one pattern appears again and again. The same name, the same network, the same source of coordination. Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. If it is officially confirmed that he is now in custody, this will remove a central piece from the chessboard. Not all threats, not all enemies, but the most persistent one. His influence has touched nearly every major plot. Removing him significantly reduces the frequency, coordination, and confidence of future attempts. What is happening in Burkina Faso is not isolated. It is not local. It is part of something far larger. If this revolution fails, if Burkina Faso collapses, Africa does not just lose a government. Africa loses momentum. We lose decades of progress, maybe a century. Because this is the first time in modern African history that sovereignty is being practiced, not just discussed. Before the Alliance of Sahel States, sovereignty was an academic concept. It was debated in universities, in conferences, in policy papers, but it was not real. Today, it is real. Countries are deciding who they partner with based on national interest, not historical obligation. This is revolutionary. True independence means choice. It means you can work with the United States, China, Europe, Russia, or anyone based on what benefits your people. Not because history demands loyalty, not because pressure forces compliance. This freedom of choice is what frightens old systems, because it breaks control. The Alliance of Sahel States changed the rules. It proved that cooperation does not need permission, that security can be regional, that policy can be independent. And once people see it working, they begin to ask dangerous questions. Why not us? There is one question that is repeated again and again by critics, commentators, and foreign observers. Why are there no elections? Why postpone democracy? Is this not authoritarianism? These questions are not new, and they deserve an honest answer. Democracy is often reduced to a single event, an election. But democracy is not a calendar date. It is not ballot boxes alone. Democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people. If elections produce leaders who serve foreign interests, protect corruption, and ignore suffering, what kind of democracy is that? If you want to understand legitimacy, do not sit in conference rooms. Go to the streets of Ouagadougou. Go to the villages. Go to the markets. Ask ordinary people how they feel today compared to 5 years ago. You will hear the same answer repeatedly. For the first time, someone is fighting for us. That is legitimacy. The same reality exists across the Alliance of Sahel States, in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso. Public support is not manufactured. It is visible. People defend their governments without being paid, without being forced. That is not dictatorship, that is consent. Some countries hold elections where outcomes are predetermined, opponents are harassed, media is controlled, internet is shut down, security forces intimidate voters. But because ballots are cast, the world applauds. Is that democracy or is it theater? The Sahel has chosen results over rituals. To understand what makes the Sahelian revolution different, we must look beyond its borders. We must compare it to what is happening in other parts of Africa. Only then does the contrast become impossible to ignore. Take Benin, for example. Once praised as a democratic model with solid institutions and a vibrant civil society, Cotonou is clean. Infrastructure is visible. On the surface, things look stable. But beneath that surface, political space is shrinking. Opposition voices are disappearing. Power is consolidating. Pluralism is fading. This is how one-party systems begin, quietly, legally, and with international applause. Then there is Cameroon, a country rich in resources, rich in talent, rich in potential, and yet one man has ruled for more than 40 years. What has that longevity produced? High unemployment, widespread poverty, youth without hope. Cameroon should not be poor, but authoritarian stability serves individuals, not nations. Length of rule does not equal success. Stability without progress is stagnation. Authority without accountability is decay. This is the model the Sahel rejects. The Sahelian leadership did not take power to preserve comfort. They took power to disrupt systems that were failing their people. They measure legitimacy not by years in office, but by lives improved. This is the difference the world struggles to accept. Not every war is fought with guns and soldiers. Some of the most dangerous battles are silent. They are fought with narratives, with headlines, with selective outrage. And the Sahel is under constant attack on this invisible battlefield. Destabilization today does not always begin with violence. It begins with doubt. Anonymous funding enters quietly. Civil groups suddenly receive resources. Media platforms amplify fear. The goal is not truth, the goal is confusion. When people no longer trust anything, control becomes easier. Money flows through NGOs, through intermediaries, through offshore routes. It funds protests that look spontaneous, campaigns that appear organic, narratives that sound independent. But behind them are interests threatened by African self-determination. Sovereignty is expensive, and enemies are well-funded. Media is no longer neutral. Stories are framed before facts are verified. Words like junta, instability, human rights concern are deployed strategically. Rarely is context provided. Rarely are local voices heard. This is not journalism, it is information warfare. The Sahel learned quickly. We invested in communication, in transparency, in direct engagement with citizens. When people understand what is happening, fear loses power. Truth does not need shouting, it needs consistency. For decades, Pan-Africanism existed mainly in words, beautiful speeches, powerful conferences, strong declarations. But when real danger arrived, when leaders were threatened, when sovereignty was challenged, those words often disappeared. What happened with Uganda was different. This was action. Ugandan military intelligence did not simply send warnings. They shared verified intelligence, exact locations, confirmed movements, communication patterns, cross-border coordination routes. This information was precise enough to prevent execution, not just react after damage. That level of detail requires trust, and trust is rare in international intelligence work. This cooperation did not happen overnight. It was built on shared understanding. That instability in one African country spreads quickly to others. That terrorism does not respect borders. That coups create regional shockwaves. By sharing intelligence, African states reduce blind spots. They stop threats before they become crises. Independent African intelligence cooperation breaks a long-standing pattern. For years, African security depended on external approval, external data, external interpretation. Now Africans are analyzing Africa for themselves. This reduces dependency, and dependency has always been profitable for someone else. This is what modern Pan-Africanism looks like. Not flags and slogans, but shared risk, shared responsibility, shared protection. It is quiet, it is professional, and it works. Leadership is never free of danger. Every day I wake up knowing that someone, somewhere may be plotting against me. Every day I walk the line between vigilance and exhaustion. The weight of responsibility presses heavier than any uniform or title. Yet, I accepted this risk the day I decided to stand for Burkina Faso. Some would say, step back, avoid conflict, save your life. But leadership is more than survival. If fear dictates action, then revolution dies before it begins. I would rather die fighting for my people's freedom than live in cowardice while they suffer silently. We must remember the legacy of Thomas Sankara, who believed that Africa's dignity was worth every risk, every sacrifice. This is not nostalgia, it is a blueprint, a standard for action. His courage is our guide, his vision our compass. To those plotting against this revolution, to those trying to destabilize the Sahel, hear this clearly. We are prepared, our intelligence is strong, our military is vigilant, our people are awake. Every attempt you make will only strengthen us, every plot will only harden our resolve. To my brothers and sisters across the continent, support this revolution. Support the Alliance of Sahel States. What we are building in Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger is not just local governance. It is a demonstration of true independence, true sovereignty, true Pan-African action. Together we are proving that Africa can protect itself, that Africa can choose its path, and that no external force, no internal traitor can break the will of a united continent. The road ahead is long and fraught with danger. The challenges are enormous, but the people are resilient. The intelligence is sharp, the military is ready, Africa is waking up, the revolution will continue, and together we will shape our destiny.